you can, should I introduce? Yes, yeah, perfect. Thank you all. We really appreciate this fantastic turnout on what unfortunately is quite a warm evening. This is Irvington About Safe Kids Community Advisory Board. We are here to keep youth healthy, responsible, and safe. Just a very brief, how was our organization formed? The Community Advisory Board has been in existence since actually before 1970. When Allyson and I took over as co-chairs in 2013, we had a lot of discussion in our CAB meetings about alcohol and drug use in the community, and we found out about the federal SAMHSA grant that we could apply for related to those issues, and we did so and won the grant award in 2014 and formed Irvington About Safe Kids. So it's a drug-free communities grant, again, as I said, provided by SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And we use money to provide local solutions to local problems. So each year we get $125,000 from this grant, and it's a 5-year grant that is renewable up to an additional 5 years.
So who are we? We are a coalition of extremely engaged participants. We are very lucky to have Dr. Harrison, and as we call them, the two Davids from the high school and middle school as our active participants, the Village of Irvington, our police department, PTSA, really every civic and youth organization, youth serving organization in the village, parents, and our fabulous students. And the coalition members are listed on our next slide. So our mission is to support our youth in making responsible, healthy, safe decisions and to reduce underage drinking and drug use by increasing awareness, promoting prevention, providing education and training, why we're here tonight, and coordinating our community resources.
So one of the ways we fulfill that mission is to engage students in peer-to-peer events. And you're going to see pictures of some of those events that we've had. This is from last year's homecoming. We also do some work during Red Ribbon Week in October. And Safe Rides is one of our signature programs because it's student-run, and it's a way for students to help their own peers get home safely if they need a ride.
And you'll notice in the last slide that there was a plea for parent volunteer chaperones for our Safe Rides program. So we are actively seeking parent chaperones. If you're interested, it's a really short training. It's about an hour at the high school. We could really use you, and our students would love to have you on board. We work with all parts of the community to build support. For 3 years in a row now, we have sponsored a pre-prom at the high school that has grown every year. We did it to have an inclusive pre-prom event for all students at the high school and to ensure that they had a safe ride there. And as you can see, the kids had a great time. These are some middle schoolers from the Positive Impact Club. There's a Positive Impact Club at both the middle and high school. They do active community service. I think in one of the slides here, they made blankets for children of parents who are suffering with substance abuse. In the next slide, there are middle school students who the past couple of years have gone to local pizza places and have placed stickers on pizza boxes. These are just a couple of examples of the things that they do. Again, for the last 2 years, we've had a wonderful inspirational Post-it campaign where really chaired by Mike Tulin from the Irvington Police Department and the Irvington Police Department and our varsity teams. We fill out inspirational messages on Post-it pads, and they're placed on lockers throughout the high school at the beginning of this school year, midterms, and exams. and final exams.
The PTSA has also joined us
Yes,
in the
been very
sticker
involved.
campaign, so we thank them as well.
Right. We've recognized 420. Do you all know what 420 is? It's sort of a flip on what 420 is supposed to be. It's supposed to be sort of a celebration day of marijuana, and for us it's Healthy Brain Day. So we've brought a brain to school and have participated with the County of Westchester, and that's an example of one of the posters that's placed around the high school. We have a new sign holder on Main Street to communicate our messages. And these are just some pictures of our students. We have a very active group of student participants every year, probably 30 to
Easily.
40 students any
Yeah.
given year that come once or twice monthly to our meetings. And without them, we couldn't do what we do.
So we also sponsor education and training with speakers and workshops, both within the schools and for parents in the evening. And these are just some pictures from some of those events from last year. We also do, in coordination with the police department, several drug take-back days a year. And, you know, this is a fantastic opportunity to go through your medicine cabinets and find all those unused and expired medications and turn them in for safe disposal. We also provide information and resources to Irvington families in many different ways. These messages appeared in the local media. And this was actually one of our more popular campaigns with students. These were bookmarks that we were able to hand out to students in the school during the day. And there were, you know, several different messages, as you can see, and you know, as a conversation starter for students who received them.
You can find us in a lot of different places. Our website, if you have not subscribed, please do. You can sign up online, or you can sign up. We'll have a sign up on the way out at the end of this program. We have a Facebook page. We tweet. From time to time, we have surveys. You will be asked to participate in one following tonight. And we ask you to stay engaged and support us.
And we promise with emails, just a quick note, that our emails are once monthly. We don't inundate you with emails because we all get too many emails. But those are, you know, a synopsis of our activities. And so we promise not to barrage you with emails.
And just one last thing, if you have a child that's interested in participating on CAB or iASK, we would love to have them.
And for those of you who don't know who we are, we know many of you in this room, but we failed to introduce ourselves, so we should tell you who we are. I'm Tanya Hunt, one of the co-chairs of iASK.
And this is Allyson Felix, and I've had 3 children that have gone K through 12 through the school system.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And
everything you've been through, I've been through 3 times.
And I have 2 in the high school right now, so we are primed to help, we hope. Thank you all for coming, and we would love to introduce Dr. Harrison, our superintendent, who will say a few words next.
So, good evening. It's great to see such a turnout for such an important event. And when I was thinking about speaking tonight, I was thinking about being up there, but now that inner Phil Donahue in me is about to come out. But I have to tell you that this is some incredible work, and we wouldn't be where we are today without the tremendous partnership that we have with iASK-CAB and all of the village resources. So I want to extend on behalf of the district my personal gratitude for all that is done. Our initiative here is all said in the name of the organization. We're about safe kids. And we could step back and we could think about many different ways that we have concerns for the safety and welfare of our kids. And tonight we take a particular focus, and that focus is something that's real. Myself and a number of other community leaders wrote 2 open letters to kind of raise the flag, a flag of caution and concern for the dangers that are out there, not just in the Irvington community, but everywhere. And the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse and use in itself should be alarming and frightening to all of us. I feel like there isn't a day that goes by that you don't flip on the news and you hear some story about the opioid epidemic. In fact, last night, after a very long Board of Education meeting, I had the news on, and there was a story about an 87-year-old lady that had just been arrested for selling prescription medication. It wasn't an initiative she had on her own. She was approached by kids, young people that knew she had medications. Whether they canvassed the pharmacy, they knew who she was, but they approached her, and they offered the woman money for medication. So, and wherever it wasn't local, but this woman is now on record as the oldest drug-dealing individual in this particular area. So when we think about it, not only we think about the concerns for our kids, we think about their welfare, but we have to think about how other folks are being victimized by the culture that is impacting us. Here in Irvington, we have a tremendous partnership with the village, with the police department, and we exchange lots of information and efforts to be able to make sure our kids are safe. But this is an issue, a concern that goes well beyond the hours of the school day. This is something that we own together. This is something where we have to come together to be able to ensure that everyone is well informed, that there's resources out there to support everyone, such as iASK, such as folks that you're going to hear from tonight on the panel. But we have to come together to make sure our children are as safe as possible, and we have to do this as a community. And we could steal a line from Hillary Clinton and speak about taking it a village, but this is an opportunity where this village really can come together to take positive steps to support our kids. So tonight is kind of a kickoff, as we promised in our letters, of this initiative. Tonight is about education, learning about the context to get the lay of the land of what our kids are thinking, what our kids have been exposed to. And then we're going to start to plan some next steps. And through iASK-CAB, we're going to launch a series of programs. And these programs are going to be ongoing. And they're going to be targeted to you as parents and your children. They're going to be targeted toward kids in the school day. But they're also going to be for the entire community. So there's going to be a call for all of us in this room to not only engage in these activities that we're going to invite you to down the road, but to bring a neighbor, someone that may not have a child that's in the school, because all of us are a part of the solution here. So I hope you find tonight informative, that you join this coalition, because it's about protecting your children and every other child that's going to grow up here in Irvington. So next I have the pleasure of introducing Judy Mezzi, one of our partners from Student Assistance Services.
Thank you so much. Give me a second. I guess I'm going to speak from here. So.
Judy, I'm so sorry. That microphone needs to go on the left stand just for sound purposes.
Okay.
I have one that goes on the right. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse me just 1 second.
Thank you.
So it is a pleasure to be here this evening. My name is Judy Mezzi. I work with Student Assistance Services, and we provide support to the Irvington iASK Coalition. I think this one's on too. Can everyone hear me? I have never been accused of speaking too softly. So, Student Assistance Services is a substance abuse prevention agency, and we provide support to many coalitions, and it is a pleasure to work in the Irvington community, and I especially want to thank the village and the school and the coalition for this ongoing collaboration. So, we have a lot to cover this evening. The speakers before me talked a lot about this, but the word coalition really comes from the root, which is coalesce, which is to come together. And that's what tonight is really about. It's about coming together to find solutions. And we do that by starting to look first at the data. So that's the first part of my job this evening, is to present the data. And just to give you some background, As Tanya mentioned, we received a DFC grant, Drug Free Communities Grant, in 2014. And that grant requires that we survey youth in at least 3 grades, but in this district we survey in grades 7 through 12. And we have to survey our youth every 2 years. And this is used as a benchmark and also so that we can continue to make sure that the work that we're doing is focused on the situation that is actually occurring in the village. So the most recent survey was in 2016, and I just want to really punctuate the last bullet on this slide, which is that this is just one piece of data, the survey data. We use it to either confirm or challenge things that we believe to be going on in the community. So after the data presentation, we're going to have a panel of experts, and that's another piece of data that we have to help focus our efforts. So the survey instrument that we used was a prevention needs assessment survey. It meets the federal government's requirements as gathering data on what we call the 4 core measures. That's use in the past 30 days, which is that's how we define current use. Did you use any of these substances in the last 30 days? Do you perceive these drugs as being risky? Do you think your parents would disapprove of you using these drugs? And do you think your peers would disapprove of you using these drugs? The survey also has what we call some risk and protective factors, and we'll get to that at the end of this report. People often ask me how you can trust the data, and to that I would say there are multiple validity and reliability checks built into the survey. I won't go into all of them right now, but this is a survey that's used nationally and has been found to be reliable and valid. Having said that, as I said on the previous slide, it is just one piece of data. So we need to sort of look at it in the context of everything that we know about our community. So the next slide shows you what our data set was in terms of students in grades 7 through 12. This is a very robust response rate, especially for the younger grades. When you get to grades 11 and 12, a little bit less of a positive response rate in terms of students participating. This could be for any number of reasons. Students didn't have to take the survey. They could opt out. A student might have tripped one of the validity measures on the survey, and therefore that survey wouldn't have been counted. So for any number of reasons, but that's just important to note. So now getting into what the data show us, the first slide that we're going to look at is past 30-day use of alcohol. The slide, there are 4 columns. The first is the grade. The second is the data that we gathered in 2014 from Irvington, then the data from 2016, and then we can compare it to national data only for grades 8, 10, and 12, because those are the grades for which national data is gathered. So the takeaway on this slide here is summarized for you at the bottom. 8th grade use, 7th and 8th grade use did increase, and but 9th through 12th grade use decreased. And use in Irvington exceeds the national prevalence data. I should say this, though, we don't have current Westchester County data, but in general we find in Westchester County that our use rates do exceed the national data, so that wouldn't be out of keeping with Westchester in general. The next slide is on binge drinking. Binge drinking is the sort of heavy episodic drinking that is most likely to be associated with negative outcomes for youth. And for this we see that 7th and 8th grade binge drinking increased somewhat, but we have such a small group of students that a small movement in that age group may or may not be meaningful. 9th and 10th grade is about the same, and 11th and 12th grade decreased, again, just a small amount. The next slide talks about past 30-day use of marijuana. And in this slide, we can see that we have again, the columns are the same. So you're looking at first the grade data, then the Irvington 2014 data, then the Irvington 2016 data, and then the national data for 2016 as your comparison point. So for this, the takeaways really are that use did increase slightly among 7th and 8th grade for 7th and 8th graders, but it had decreased, marijuana use decreased in every high school grade. And this actually happened during a time when marijuana use increased a little bit nationally, so that's an especially good takeaway. It's important to note that marijuana use doubles between 10th and 11th grade and then 11th and 12th grade. So this is a concerning moment in terms, and an opportunity in terms of prevention. And again, as the last bullet notes, while we don't have current Westchester County data, this data, while it shows that Irvington students' use is higher than the national average, that would not be, generally speaking, that would be consistent with other Westchester County communities. So past 30-day use of cigarettes, cigarette use has increased slightly among 7th and 8th graders, but decreased significantly among 9th through 12th graders. And I probably should have punctuated this at the beginning. This survey was done in 2016. So the cohorts that we're talking about are not the current, you have to think back a school year. Just in case you're trying to track this in your head with your own child. You have to think back a year. So, and in general, I would say the cigarette numbers are really very positive. This survey, we did not ask questions on vaping. I think if we had asked questions on vaping, we might have been a little bit more concerned about the use of nicotine and nicotine products, but in any case, regular cigarette use, the data was very positive. The following slide is on past 30-day misuse of prescription drugs, and again, here the data is very strong in terms of low use among Irvington students, although we did see a concerning increase. And one of the things that we know is that even though we see such small numbers of youth using prescription drugs within the high school, the consequences can be so immediately devastating that we need to pay attention to this even if the numbers are small. So those are the prevalence rates that we look at. The next slides are what we call well, they're the other three core measures. So we're going to be talking about perception of risk, perception of parental disapproval, and perception of peer disapproval. So perception of risk asks the youth, how risky do you think it is if? So for alcohol, it asks, how risky do you think it is if somebody your age has 5 or more drinks of an alcoholic beverage once or twice a week? And I think the takeaway on this, and here we don't have national numbers as reference points, but we have our 14 and 16 data. I would just actually look at the 2016 column and just say that in general, the perception of risk of alcohol remains pretty strong. It does decline a little bit in the older grades, but it actually remains pretty strong. And the same cannot be said of marijuana. There seems to be a strong erosion in the perception of risk of marijuana as Irvington youth get older. If we look at that same issue of perception of risk for cigarettes and prescription drugs, we see that both of those remain strong pretty much throughout the grades. So cigarettes, certainly, we see a strong perception of risk, and prescription drugs, while we see some movement, it's generally pretty strong. Okay, so now let's get to perception of parental disapproval. And what we see here is that students generally perceive that their parents would disapprove of them using alcohol. Even by the time they're in 12th grade, students perceive that their parents would think it was wrong for them to use an alcoholic beverage nearly every day. So it's a pretty high level that we've set there, but that's the level that that the federal government has given us to ask. For marijuana, it's actually, it declines as students age till it's about 80% of seniors believe that their parents would think it was wrong for them to smoke marijuana. And then if we look at cigarettes and prescription drugs, no surprise following the prevalence rates and the perception of risk rates, we find that those remain fairly strong throughout the grades. If we look at perception of friends' disapproval, this is how do you think your peers would feel about somebody your age using these different drugs? I have to say it's very hot up on this stage. So we find that with alcohol, while 7th graders start believing, with a huge, overwhelming, almost 100% believing that their peers would disapprove, by the time they're seniors, only 77% believe that their peers would think it was wrong for them, for somebody their age, to drink an alcoholic beverage nearly every day. The marijuana peer disapproval number is particularly concerning in that by the time youth are seniors, only a quarter believe that there's any risk that their peers would disapprove of them using marijuana. And you can see that between 11th and 12th grade, those numbers are literally cut in half. Moving on to cigarettes and prescription drugs, we find that those numbers remain fairly robust throughout the years, with most students believing that their peers would disapprove of them using cigarettes or using prescription drugs. So the next slide is going to show you a little bit about where youth reported getting and using alcohol. So I would say, probably no surprise to anybody in this room, most of the youth who drank, and these numbers are just for the students who reported drinking. So 73% of the students who reported drinking said that they got their alcohol at a party. And just note that for this question, you could answer yes to as many as you wanted to. So that's why the numbers exceed 100%. And you'll see the bottom bullet for that is that 34% report that they got it from home with their parents' permission. And then if you look at the other side of this chart, it's where did you drink it? If you did drink alcohol, where did you usually drink it? So there's a lot of drinking going on in homes and a lot of drinking going on in outdoor areas. The next slide talks about protective factors. So just like with heart disease, where we now have a huge body of research that says that there are factors in our genetics and in our behavioral health that either protect us from heart disease or put us at risk for heart disease, we have some of that same data now for substance abuse. So the research can really point out that if you have certain things in your environment as you're growing up, you are either more protected from substance abuse or you have more risk for substance abuse. Now, of course, it's not 100%, it's not absolute. We all know people that have lived a life that would certainly, one would think that they would end up with some kind of heart disease and they end up just fine. So it's not a 100% correlation, but there is a strong correlation between these protective factors and then the following page of risk factors. So in Irvington, these were the strongest protective factor, or these were the protective factors, and the levels of protection are associated with lower rates of use. So this is a slide where you want the number to be high. And you can see that 78% of your youth have a belief in the moral order. That's things like, it's not okay to cheat on a test even if you're not going to get caught. Or you should tell your parents something you've done that's bad even if you're going to get into trouble. So that's a really good finding in Irvington. And then if you go down, it talks about anytime you see the word pro-social, that's just like good for the community. So things that are good for the community. The following slide is about risk factors. And risk factors are the sorts of things that we know are associated with increased risk of developing alcohol or other drug use and abuse later in life. And you can see that the highest levels of risk were rewards for antisocial behavior. Antisocial behavior, for instance, is getting into a fight or spray painting something on a wall. So it's interesting because it seems to go right against the moral behavior, but the survey is what it is. And then poor family management speaks to things like, my parents know where I am. My parents ask me questions about my homework. So these are the risk factors, but you can see that all of the risk factors were below the 50% level. So in summary, what I would say is that the strengths that we saw on the survey are that alcohol, marijuana, and cigarette use decreased in each of the high school grades. So that's a really nice finding for a community that got a grant in 2014 and really brought to bear community efforts in this area. Very few Irvington 7th and 8th graders are using alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, or other drugs, and you can read the rest of it yourself. And we have some very strong, significant protective factors. And then here are some of the challenges. We saw some slight but concerning increases in the younger grades, which is something we could really be focusing on. We still have rates of use in some instances that are above the national average. That's something that we should be looking at. We really need to be looking at marijuana in terms of perception of risk and perception of peer disapproval, and social access to alcohol. That means access to alcohol not at a bar or a restaurant, but through social means, appears to be a challenge. The last slide I'm sorry, not the last slide, the second to last slide lists some of the activities that are going on in your school and community, and I'm not going to dwell on that because we heard some of that already, and we'll be hearing more from our panelists. And the last slide is just our recommendations, and I guess one of our recommendations really is to continue to do community events like this, where we have this incredible turnout and people really come out to show their concern and to participate in the discussion. So those are the data that we have. I am just going to do a quick time check. Okay, we are good. And I'm going to introduce our panel now. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to come up on stage as I introduce you. I don't know how you'll fit, but we'll have to make that work. So first I'm going to introduce David Cohen, principal of the Irvington High School. Thank you so much. Now I'll let you on stage. You're very welcome. Andrea Felix, Assistant Director for School-Based Programs at Student Assistance Services. Jonathan Kleinman, LCSW, a Rivertown psychotherapist. Thank you so much. The Honorable Desmond Lyons, Justice for the Village of Irvington. Dr. Paige Schwartz, an emergency room physician. And last but certainly not least, Michael Tulin, detective and youth officer with the Irvington Police Department. Thank you so much. Okay, so as you have seen a couple of times in this presentation, the mission of the coalition is, or our vision statement is, working together to keep our youth healthy, responsible, and safe. And you can certainly see that we have this incredible group of people that are working together to keep our youth healthy, responsible, and safe. So I would just like to give you all another round of applause before they start. The way that we're going to work this is that we have asked each of our panelists to prepare a response to a question that we will pose to them, and I've asked them each to try to keep their answer to 3 minutes. So if I cut them off, they've been warned in advance. I'm not being rude, I just want you to know that. And following that, we will open it up to discussion and questions from the audience. So I would like to, but our first question is for Youth Officer Tulin. And so...
I'll be way less than 3 minutes.
I got a timer on my phone and everything. So what we'd like to hear from you is, how do these data that we just saw, how do they reflect what you are seeing in the community, and what else are you seeing that we might be concerned about?
Stats-wise, I don't know the amount of kids that are using, but the stats that are up there with alcohol and marijuana, that's definitely what we're seeing. Opioid abuse, it's minimal right now, but I think it's definitely coming. It seems to us, it appears to us at the police department that it's easier to get marijuana than it is to get anything else. We do arrest kids with, certain pills on them. We don't know, why they have them. They tell us a story why they have them. Do we think they're using? Possibly. We definitely arrest kids with marijuana. We definitely arrest kids with alcohol. But what we're hearing is it's easier to get marijuana in town or out of town than it is to get alcohol.
All right. That was an excellent role modeling of sticking to the time limit. I like that. I like that very much.
I'm a rule follower.
And a good answer.
I'm a rule follower.
Okay. Our next question is for Dr. Schwartz, and if you would please let us know because we are, as community members and parents, all really concerned about what are the health risks that you see associated with this sort of use, alcohol, marijuana, prescription drugs? And can you mention any specific issues related to substance use and emergency services and youth in particular?
So this is a big answer. I tried to really,
Well, you have some of his time.
really minimize it. So the first thing I want to say is that drugs and alcohol have so many effects on people. I'm going to talk about short-term and long-term effects of some of them. But what I want to say is the most dangerous thing is that it alters your frame of mind, and it leads to poor decision-making and behaving in ways in which you normally wouldn't. So if you were drinking alcohol, your reflexes aren't as good, you get in a car, you get in an accident, you can get killed, you can kill someone. If you're taking opiates, which are very sedating, you can get so drowsy, you might end up in a situation where you really can't get out of something dangerous. I'm just gonna kind of touch on each of the three subjects. So what happens if you take a drink of alcohol? I think we all know. At first, you feel good, your mood is up, you're feeling social, you feel self-confident, then you start to drink more. And this is where a lot of bad things can happen. Your vision gets blurry. Is that me making that noise? There's a lot of balance problems. You can fall and get hurt. Your speech is slurred, feeling dizzy. You may start to vomit. Alcohol is a very sedating agent, even though you feel good at first. It's a very depressant on your body, and you can become unconscious pretty easily, and you can vomit when you're unconscious, and then you would choke on your vomit. And this is how people can die pretty quickly from even just drinking one time. Some long-term effects of alcohol, excessive alcohol use, increase in heart disease, blood pressure, stroke, liver disease, and even a lot of cancers. Alcohol is a carcinogen for those. As for marijuana, we see, people smoke it. A bigger thing that's becoming more popular are the edibles, which are very dangerous, and I'll explain why in a minute. So marijuana impairs your attention and concentration, your memory and your learning are affected, your motor coordination. Again, it alters your frame of mind and your behavior and decision making. So when you're using any substance, you don't make a decision you normally would make. What I want to say about edibles is, so you eat a cookie that has pot in it, and people, kids or whoever, don't feel any effect, so they just eat more, and then all of a sudden, they feel an effect, and so it's stronger, lasts longer. One thing that I actually learned is chronic use of marijuana in adolescence is associated with later development of schizophrenia, which is a psychiatric disorder. I didn't know that. Other things with marijuana are increase of stroke and MI, something called hyperemesis syndrome, which people come into the ER vomiting, belly pain, and until you can kind of probe a history, that's something that is caused by marijuana. The other topic is about prescription drugs, which there are many. The big ones are opiates, which all have the same effect as a heroin, whether it's in a pill form or injectable form, and benzodiazepines, which are used for anxiety, like Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin. There's 1,000,001 street names for these. There's combinations. Again, they alter your frame of mind, and you can't make a decision that you normally would. So the basic thing with the opiates and the benzodiazepines are, again, sedation. They slow your breathing, and an OD for an opiate or a benzodiazepine are you stop breathing, and if you can't breathe, then you die. So that's really what an OD for opiates or benzos are. Other risks of opiates, if you're injecting them, you can have infections, transmission of HIV, hepatitis B and C. And so just in conclusion, I just want to say I know there's some kids out there, if you want to be successful in school, in work, on the field and sports, in relationships with friends or with a significant other, you really can only be your best when your mind and body are clear and you can make the proper decisions that you normally would, and that you're not impaired.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I made it under 3 minutes.
Okay, and now a question for our judge. What are the laws that govern youth alcohol and drug use and parental responsibility?
So that's a big question for 3
For
minutes.
3 minutes,
All right,
I'm
so-
going to give you a little leeway there.
Okay. There are so many different permutations of the law, and each of the offenses vary in terms of whether this is the amounts of drugs or marijuana or alcohol, quite frankly, could each cause the penalty to be more and more severe. They range anywhere from violations, which carry no, which aren't printable offenses, which aren't criminal convictions, all the way to felonies, which could cause mandatory jail time. So with regard to alcohol, there's possession of alcohol by minors, which we see a lot of here in the village, and those are typically cases in which someone's at a party and they get and the police come and round everyone up and call the parents and do what they have to do, and they are issued summonses for possession of alcohol with a minor. Those are governed by the Alcohol Beverage Control Law of the state of New York. They carry with it fines and other penalties for the kids. There are more severe consequences for adults in terms of social host liability. Westchester County has a social host law, which impacts, which have a pretty significant impact on adults and and parents who host a party at their house because they think it's a safer thing to do. And then shifting over to marijuana, same thing. Possession of marijuana has a scale, depending on whether or not it's your first or second or third offense, and it depends on the quantity. So it runs the gamut from a violation all the way up to felonies. Sale of marijuana obviously is treated more severely in the law, and most of those offenses are criminal convictions or criminal offenses. There are also other different areas, different parts of the penal law that are implicated in some of these drug and alcohol cases, and those are endangering the welfare of a minor. If someone's over 18, could be unlawfully dealing with a minor. All of those are criminal convictions, misdemeanor convictions. So it could be someone who's 18 or 19 dealing with a 17-year-old and could wind up with a pretty serious criminal conviction. So sorry I can't give you the full rundown of all the penal law statutes and all the potential offenses, but they really run the gamut depending on the nature of the offense and the quantity of the substances involved, etc.
Excellent, thank you so much. I'm actually going to go out of order for a second and go down to our Principal Cohen at the end there. And if you would just tell us about what the schools are doing to prevent and or address these trends.
Sure. First and foremost, we're a school, so, it's an educational model up front and, all the ways that we can to support our students. So when I think of that, I think of how we engage students, whether it's in the classroom, and that starts with our health program, which is primarily for our 9th graders. That's typically where our high school students take our health class. There's been a lot of units, a lot of guest speakers, a lot of partnerships that exist within our health curriculum. But then it branches much further outside of that. And we have a lot of extracurriculars that provide engagement and educational value for students around the dangers and risks of using drugs and alcohol and other risky behaviors. I think of one of our strongest partnerships is with Ms. Jen Nunziato, who's our student assistance counselor, and she's full-time on the campus with us, and this is her 3rd year now with Irvington, and she's made incredible connections with kids. She serves as the advisor for our Positive Impact Club as well as for support around Safe Rides. And students come and see her all the time, and actually a lot of her work with students is confidential, except if she feels that students are immediate risk to themselves or others. And then ultimately it rounds out with other partnerships that we have, and it's really why we're here tonight. And it's really uplifting to see the number of people that have turned out. But our work has really taken off in the last few years when we've had a chance to partner with iASK and advance the work with CAB. I think of everything from guest speakers and important presentations, and we've been thoughtful around trying to have them in sort of different perspectives. So we've had some speakers that get very technical around data that pertains to drug and alcohol use and the impacts on the body. And we've also had very emotional and impactful guest speakers that talk from personal experience. And they each provide different layers of support and hopefully resonate strongly with our teens. But there's a need for more. I think part of the education and the engagement is events like this and the ability to engage more parents in those conversations and those educational opportunities as well.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Andrea Felix, and the question is, what are some strategies that parents can use to prevent use?
Thank you, Judy. I want to begin by suggesting that there are two compelling reasons why youth start or continue to use drugs, and I believe the doctor alluded to this, and that's to feel good and to feel better. And while there are many factors that contribute to a young person starting to use and continuing to use, tonight the question for us as parents is to ask, what can we do to help our children feel good enough so that they could resist and refuse the invitations that they may get to try and use alcohol or other drugs, and also what tools do they need. So overall, I think that what we need to provide for our children is encouragement, is having high expectations, but balancing that with accepting some of the decisions and choices that they make, which may be disappointing or annoying to us. Things like, I don't understand why you don't want to join the soccer team, you're a wonderful athlete, or why don't you want to be in AP classes? And so while we may be disappointed by this, the point that I'm trying to make is that if the more that our children know that we accept them for who they are, the better they'll feel about themselves and the less likely they are to get involved in alcohol and other drugs. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have high expectations for success, because having expectations is a protective factor. However, there's lots of research that says that we need to be sure that when we have those expectations, that our children don't receive that and are not feeling that their value and their worth is how well they do or how they succeed or if they're the captain of the football team. So it's really about reaching a balance. Specifically, and segueing on expectations, it's really important that we have conversations with our children in age-appropriate ways, and that in those conversations we give clear and consistent message about the dangers of not using. That our children know that there'll be consequences if they break those rules, and that that's done on a consistent basis. When parents do that, and year after year after year there's surveys, when parents do that, children in those families report using illicit drugs in a significantly decreased way than when parents don't. The other thing is that we need to prepare our kids to say no. So that may seem easy, and we can teach them skills, and maybe I can talk about this later, but what are refusal skills? But we also need to be able to say no. So if our children are asking us to do something or go someplace and our gut says we don't want them to do it, if we can't say no to our children, how do we expect them to say no to their peers? So we want to know who their friends are. We want to welcome our children's friends in our home. And when they're there, we want to make sure that we are visible. We want to know if as they get older and they're going to parties, we want to know that there's going to be adult supervision, because we know that when there's not adult supervision, that young people will do things that they would not do if there was adult supervision. And we want to be home and we want to be up when they come home. And we used to talk about giving them a kiss so we can smell their breath. Well, I think it's still a good idea to give them a kiss, but we really want to check them out because we know that there are things that our children could use to get high that there won't be an odor or a smell. And I think that it's important to tell them, I'm up and I'm here and I'm checking you out because I love you and I want to make sure that you are okay. The other thing, I'm just going to mention this because maybe, Jonathan, you'll be talking about this, is that if we know or if we are concerned, while mood swings and behavior changes are part of adolescence, if we're worried about that, we really want to consult with someone. There are school counselors, there are student assistance counselors, psychologists, and check it out. Because we know that kids who have clinical anxiety and depression, and when those kids use, their rate of acceleration far exceeds those kids who don't. So I'll end here.
That is an excellent segue to our next question, to our next presenter. So our next question is for Jonathan Kleinman, and the question is, if a parent or a student called you concerned about their own use or the use of somebody, a loved one, what's the next step? What would you talk to them about?
Well, I think, and that's a great segue because, and we'll elaborate more on this a little bit later, but one thing to know is that when people call me and they've gotten to make that phone call, as parents, they're usually scared. And when we as parents are scared, we tend to rush. And so there is a thought, I think, and as a parent myself, when something's wrong with my kid, I get nervous. And so what I want to tell you tonight is if people feel that we have to rush and get someone to a therapist right away, it's much more important to get someone to the right therapist because every family is different. So what I usually ask is for the parents to come in and meet me first because you guys know your kids. And with some of these teenagers, you don't have a heck of a lot of time to drag them all over the place, going from therapist to therapist to therapist. You're going to get maybe 1 or 2 shots at it. So I like people to come in, meet with me, and you'll let me know, would your kid like me? Do you think your kid would like me? Because one of the most important things about a therapeutic success is the therapeutic relationship. And the other important thing is therapy shouldn't be another thing for you guys to fight about if people are fighting. And I've seen this a lot, where you have an appointment, hurry up, it's time to go. I just got home from soccer, I'm not going. Well, we have to go, we're paying for this. No, and then there's a big fight. So we want to really make sure that it's a right fit. And if there's anything that we remember from this tonight, that's very important. Once the consultation's over, there's 2 things that can happen. One is we can get the student, the young person, to come in and have a consultation with me. If the young person won't, and sometimes that happens, they just are going to refuse to go, it's very important to get support for yourselves because this can be very scary. To figure out, look, what are the ways that we can work together as a family to help our kid? If the young person does come in for a consultation, what we really start to talk about is self-awareness. Because are there teenagers here tonight? Anybody? Over there? When they say, you've got to take responsibility for your own actions, right? But it's really hard to do that if you're not aware of what you're doing. And that's what we really start to look at. If there's any successful course of treatment, it's having that relationship to say, hey, let's try to be self-aware about what we're doing. And why am I doing this? And I think that's a really good place to start.
Great, thank you so much. So we are now at the point where we are opening it up to you all for any questions that you may have. So I'm just throwing it open at this point. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Dr. Short spoke very clearly about the risks and the dangers, about marijuana in particular. My question is this, how does that
Really?
Offset, or how does that analysis get done in light of the fact that we live in a country where the current trend is to legalize marijuana, including in New York State? So how do we justify that if it causes car accidents? Why are we thinking about legalizing it? And that's a judge question, a police question, and anyone's.
Well, I would say that there are a lot of things that are legal that are not safe. I would start with that.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So it's going to be a legislation. I mean, I don't agree with it, but people do agree with it. I'm sure people agree with it. So, but it's going to be a legislation thing, and we have to enforce the laws, and you know, Judge Lyons has to enforce what we enforce the laws, and then the doctor has to deal with the effects of, you know, people doing it and stuff like that.
I would also say this, that, and this is not my area of expertise, but there are many different chemicals in marijuana, and some of the chemicals that have been most found to be associated, the chemical that gets you high is THC. The chemical that's been associated with a lot of the properties that seem to have medicinal purposes is CBD, and so the medicinal properties don't exist in the chemical that gets you high. So it's almost a different conversation, the medical piece of it and yes.
I just wanted to add one thing, is that I think your question speaks to when we looked at the perception that the kids had of risk of alcohol, it was much higher than marijuana, and I think that's related to what's going on in terms around the country, legalization, recreational use, so.
Right, and I do think that that's one of the reasons why it's so much more difficult to convince young people that marijuana is risky when we know for a fact that it is risky for the developing brain.
And Judy, I'll add one other piece. You know, I think we always have to remember this isn't a debate on whether marijuana should be legal or not. This is about the impact that it has on our teenagers.
Right.
So ultimately, it's about good decision making, and it's about understanding the impact that it has on teenagers. You know, we all have to remember what the teenage brain is all about, the development stages that they're in. And, you know, I always like to talk to our students about something called the amygdala. And teenagers purposely have an undersized amygdala because it's the part of the brain that controls our decision making. And the teenage years are naturally times to take risks, but we want them taking good risks. And there are very dangerous risks that are out there. So that becomes an important point around this. And I also want to say that it comes down to a lot of the stress factors, and I think some of my colleagues on the panel here have started to bring that up, and it speaks back to the reasons why our teenagers turn to the use of drugs and alcohol, and what they're going through in a day-to-day level as well.
Thank you. Another question.
I have two questions, so I'm happy to paste it. The first is the drinking place, whether it's the woods, the rock, or someone's house, is also a socializing place. And I've been struck that, for instance, there's no open gym for teenagers ever, as far as I know, or my teenagers know. And I'm wondering if, just in the future, this can be part of a conversation for iASK about creating socializing places for teenagers, community-based or over, you know, whatever it may be, even with parent volunteers, because I just want to put that out there.
Sure, I could jump in on that one too. We have in the works, I know I've given stuff to Joe Archino, the rec supervisor, to have like a teen center, whether it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. We're trying to just work out the logistics of that. But we have researched it, we've looked at it. The grant is probably going to fund some of it, and you know, we'll staff it as well.
Tanya and Allyson, do you want to say anything more about that?
I would just add that we constantly ask our students on the CAB what they would like to do on the weekends and what kind of alternative, you know, activities or places we could provide to them. And we hope that the teen center happens. I think it will happen, and we hope that kids come. I mean, a lot of teens in the room have said you could have the teen center, but people won't come. But we still feel that there's enough interest from, you know, a smaller group of kids that would come. So it's a constant struggle that we have, We're continually talking to the kids in our groups, and all ideas are welcomed.
And I would just add, join us. You can help us make it happen.
Can I ask a second question, or is that pushing it?
Why don't we see if there are other questions, and then we can come back to you.
I'm loud enough. Go ahead.
If you could just use the mic so we can record it.
It's recording.
Regarding school and deterrence for kids, are there policies, for example, if you're on a sports team and you get caught drinking, what's the policy for that? Just as parents, especially for people who just now are getting to high school level, what's the policies with those?
So we have very strict policies, but I'll go back to the way I started my intro before. Our primary purpose is educational and support. But with that, there are consequences, and we're very strict and serious about wanting to have a drug and an alcohol-free campus. And when students are caught either in possession or under the influence, there is a pretty strict consequence that comes through that. So it always depends on the circumstances, so I'm not prepared to be able to say what that is. But students have been and have often faced significant time out of school, weeks to months at times. Within that process is usually an opportunity to figure out some alternatives, whether or not we can work with families and the student to try to seek other programs, try to gauge whether or not there's a deeper problem at hand and how to support that. And our goal is always to try to get our students back into school as quickly as possible, but under the right circumstances. So the idea isn't just to get them back in school, but to get them back in school in a way that they're not going to make those same behaviors repeat themselves, and that they're in a position to be able to be stronger and make better decisions.
Thank you. I think we have a question in the back of the room.
Hi, I probably don't need the mic, but I'll take it anyway. First, I know most of you up here, and I think what you do every day is applaudable. I know your dedication to the kids and how much you care about them. My question is, what is our real goal? And is it realistic? Are we as adults taking actions to make ourselves feel better? I think everyone can agree, and through experience, pledges don't work. Zero tolerance doesn't work. Total freedom doesn't work. And this hypocrisy that unfortunately we struggle with as parents, because you get the answers, well, we did it as a kid, is confusing our kids. I have a simple answer for my kids. I also shoplifted. I'll break your fingers, okay? I think the hypocrisy is confusing them, because on one side, we tolerate it. We know our kids are going to bedrock. We take pledges with our kids, yet we know what they're doing. I had my question here.
Can you just, sum it up in a question?
Yep.
And you can hand it over to our
I think we have to focus on the tougher questions. I think we need to really find out from the kids, are the consequences actually doing more damage? Are the consequences decreasing the trust that our kids have in the authorities of the parents, the schools, the police?
So what would your question be?
My question is can we find out if it's working? And I see the numbers are going up, and are the consequences causing more harm?
Okay.
And I don't know whether the kids want to, want to know that too?
I'm going to just say that the numbers actually weren't all going up. The numbers in high school were going down, and I'd actually, Andrew, do you want to respond to this?
So I have a... Hello? I have a couple of thoughts. And one is that I think that sometimes, as parents, we confuse permissiveness with openness. And so if we tell our children, if you drink, I want to hear about it, that somehow that is going to put a parameter or contain their drinking. Every bit of research confirms the opposite, that even when well-intended, when we allow our children to drink under certain circumstances, that those children are more likely to get in trouble with alcohol and other drugs, or to get involved in alcohol or drug related incidences. And then I think we also, want to distinguish between punishment, and consequences. So even when schools have strict policies, those consequences typically involve time for the children, whether it's through in-school counseling or outside counseling, to reflect on what they did, to learn about what they did, to think about it. So those are my thoughts on that.
Does anyone else in the panel want to add to that? Okay, do we have another question? Yes, over here in the back.
I'm working my way around.
All right.
So this is related to what you were saying, and maybe this will help answer it. So as a parent, you said we should have these conversations that are age appropriate. And so where can we find guidance or resources on what to say? And is saying that we tried it or we did it, is that giving them permission, or should we lie? Like, how do we, is there research or are there resources to help us guide those conversations that we should be having with our children to help minimize it?
Well, I can answer that, and I don't know if you want to add to it, just briefly. So I think that's an excellent question, and I think that there are some circumstances where, am I echoing? No. There are some circumstances where you might want to talk about so if you're in active recovery and you're going to treatment and you're going to meetings, I think it's important to be open about that. I think if your children grew up with you and you used in your youth, regardless of whether you had challenges with that or not, you want to really think carefully about that, because it could backfire. I mean, I've been at lots of presentations just like this where parents share that they talked about their own use with their children with good intentions. And what happens is that it's easy then for the children to come back and talk about, well, you did it and you're okay, or you did it and you went through some tough times and I might as well. So I think you really want to exercise caution that can really backfire in terms of sharing. What you want to share is what you think will be most helpful, and there is no research that suggests when you talk about your own drinking and your own drug use that it contributes to children's resilience in terms of not getting involved.
Just really briefly, I mean, and I don't know if there's a lot of research on this, but in my experience, this is an incredibly personal issue, and one size does not fit all. And I think people sometimes think that it does, that there's sort of a list of things to say, but every family is completely different. It's important to know about your own family. What do you believe? What is your family culture? And if you're feeling that, look, this is just not going to be tolerated, it's important, because a lot of people, I think they are reticent to say that to their children, whether or not you had your own experiences when you were younger or you had no experiences when you were younger. So if you're getting a consultation, what I talk to people about is it's really important to figure out, look, what is our message for our family and our culture, and what do we believe?
And could I just say, another part of your question is where do we get those resources? So I'm looking to see if Lisa Tomini, you were here a minute ago. Lisa Tomini is our coalition coordinator. Do we have resources for parents who want to find ways to speak to their teens, preteens? Is that on our website? Could it be on our website?
Yes, I would definitely encourage everybody to visit the website. It's iASK-CAB.org. There are some resources available there. We're very fortunate to have a very large body of research and information at the end of our fingertips, actually. So we try to put as much as we can up on our own website. We link to other credible websites, whether it's the federal government or other agencies within the country. So I encourage you to do that. And then there is also a Westchester-wide coalition website that's also very powerful, powertotheparent.org. And that website has a lot of direct information on conversation pieces that you can have. How do you answer certain questions? It gives you ideas. It doesn't give you definitive answers, but it gives you options. So I would definitely encourage you to look there.
Thank you. All right.
And Judy, thank you for mentioning Lisa. If I can add to that one thing. I also want to point out that I think sometimes we get into dangerous scenarios when we take our experiences when we were teenagers and assume that our current teenagers are potentially going to have those same experiences. So, you know, I've been to enough of the presentations at the high school over the 4 years to learn a little bit more about the statistics, and one thing that's alarming is the marijuana that people were smoking in the 70s and 80s is very different than the marijuana and the access that our teenagers have today. It's far more dangerous, it is far more potent, and the impact that it has on individuals is far more significant. And I also think that it's about social circles. So the social circles that any of us may have had as teenagers may be very different than the dynamics that our kids are going through here in Irvington. I can tell you that as principal and as someone who's around our teenagers each and every day, many of our teenagers experience social norms and expectations that put them really in a quandary about the decisions that they have to make each and every day, especially on weekends, and how they feel that they fit in and that they're perceived. So there's a cultural aspect to this as well. So it goes much beyond just the experience that any of us might have had as teenagers, and it's really about trying to educate our teens around the decisions that they have to make each and every day.
Thank you.
So I am curious to that there hasn't been any discussion around the legal drugs that may be used that are in the medicine cabinet for parents being okay with their doctor with the doctor prescribing pain medication in terms of the parent role modeling, in terms of some of their own addictive behaviors. I mean, we're talking a lot about the kids and their behaviors and their choices, but there hasn't been much discussion around the parents' responsibility as to role modeling in terms of their drug and alcohol and just their daily medication of their use, and how that plays into the okayness of my parents are doing it because they have this problem, and they're on this medication. I mean, these kids are medicated, and you know, where's the discussion on why that is okay for them to be medicated like that, legally medicated?
Thank you.
Yeah, Neil, I think you raised a good point. And I speak not as a judge, as a parent of 5 young kids. I think it's a really good point about how we as parents model behavior for our kids. I think that's, I think it goes a long way to, helping alleviate this problem by having our, the parents modeling behavior for their kids and having their kids live into that behavior and have a good role model in their lives.
Absolutely. Is there any other?
Sure, I'll jump in because I have 4 kids, so not as much as Desmond, but I consider myself a professional parent too. There's no handbook, there's no guidelines. It's all how you perceive it should be, and that, there's nobody going to tell you that you have to raise your kid a certain way. I could try, it's not going to work. I coach a lot of your kids that are in here. I went to high school with some of you guys that are in here. Where we graduated from Irvington, we, not that we did the things that the kids are doing now, but there's no guideline. With a doctor prescribed thing, you have to monitor it. You have to monitor. I know, kids have sore arms and sore legs. I coach 3 sports at the high school. They're going to be sore, but you have to monitor what they're taking. You have to monitor what you're taking. It's all, unfortunately, it's life nowadays, So being a professional with the police department and coaching kids and parent of 4 kids, there's no guidelines, there's no book. It's you don't have to apply to be a parent. That it's never going to happen. You have to raise your kids how you feel they're going to be productive human beings in the future. Is that going to work for everybody? No, but it's something. I mean, you could always come into my office. My office is always open. I can give you advice that I've done. I have 2 in college, 1 in high school, 1 in middle school now. Like I said, I've coached a lot of your kids here. I've done clinics with kids here. It's that fine line. There is no black and white. It's all gray.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add
Oh.
something to that if I can.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I don't mean to make you move my. Yeah. So I just wanted to say really quickly about that. Allyson and I were just, making note of some of the things that we've done related to this issue. And although we didn't mention it in our presentation, we did send a letter to all the local physicians about a year and a half ago saying, we just want you to be aware of how much you're prescribing in terms of pain medication, especially to young people who, probably don't need as much pain medication as what you're subscribing for them. So we did do that. And then, also we give a lot of credit to our police department for the prescription drug take-back days. And I know in my own experience, I gathered, medications in our home, and I was shocked about how much we had that we weren't using, that nobody, had expired, not using, and we in our house where we shudder to even take aspirin for a headache. Like, we're really cautious about that, and I think even for me, I was like, wow, we have a lot around. So take advantage of the opportunity. It doesn't take that long to gather, and it really helps get it out of your house.
And if you need to get it out immediately, you can always take the Tarrytown or Ardsley. They have a 24-hour drop box.
That's a very good point. Irvington's police department is so small in the reception area. I don't know if that's what we would call it, but the lobby, that there's not really room for a permanent receptacle, but pretty much every village has one. And I'm seeing other people with questions, but I also have the microphone here, so we'll pass it around as we need to.
Actually, I just want to say it's 8:25, and we did say we were going to end by 8:30, so I think we're going to take 2 more questions, and then maybe our panelists will be nice enough to hang out in case there are other questions. So
I'm going to say we're going to do 3 more questions.
I'm sorry, we're going to do...
Because I made a promise. We have one question here, another question here, then Allyson.
Okay, and our panelists will be here for additional questions, but you certainly don't want to challenge the superintendent of schools right in front of everybody, so go ahead.
So first I want to say that as a high school student in the city, I certainly drank and definitely got myself into some dangerous situations several times that by the grace of God, I got out of. So I don't share much with my children, and I also don't feel like a hypocrite because I'm the parent. And I know that those situations happened, and I know what's best for them. But my question is, I've just heard that not everyone that is caught with alcohol or marijuana or opioids necessarily gets arrested, but maybe has the parent called. So I'm just wondering how you keep track of that, if you have, those repeat offenders, so to speak, and how you handle those situations.
Sure. Police officers always have discretion in every situation. There are certain must-arrest situations, and obviously the kids will be arrested or adults will be arrested in that point. But we do keep tabs on kids. We know who the frequent flyers are. I'm involved heavily in the village. Like I said, I grew up here. I bought a house right next to my mother. I have 4 kids that went through the school district. I coach 3 sports at the high school, so I'm involved. But there are kids that still slip through the cracks and that I don't see, but we have a great communication system with Jen and Mr. Cohen and even Dr. Harrison. I was texting all the principals and the admins today about stuff that was going on around towns. So we do keep track.
Oh.
Sorry.
You took it back? All right, so we're going to go here and then I'll work my way back.
Just curious, living in a very, very small town as we do, it's hard to not hear what goes on a weekly basis, on a weekend basis. So those who have kids in the high school, most are aware that there was an incident last weekend at an outdoor place. So I guess my question is, I'm curious, and this has nothing to do with Mike, with you and your group, but what's the policy of a non-Irvington community or police force coming in and handling a situation? And with last weekend, and maybe it's hearsay, maybe it's true, but I know from, at least from firsthand from some people that I know, that there was excessive force used. And by the way, I will preface all that with, I and my wife, and we don't endorse anything that went on that night whatsoever. So 2 wrongs don't make a right. I'm just curious what the policy or how that comes to be.
Sure. So I wasn't there that night, so I don't actually know what happened. I did ask around too. I heard the same rumors and everything else that everybody else heard. We do have a memorandum of agreement, I believe it's called, Brian, with Greenberg, Hastings, Dobbs Ferry, Tarrytown. They're all a part of the Greenberg Drug and Alcohol Task Force. So they will go from village to village, and they're looking for, they've made gun arrests, they've made alcohol arrests, marijuana arrests. So that, I don't know what happened. I heard the same thing from many people. I know that the powers that be have been informed about that, and I believe they're looking into it.
Okay, and so we have our last question right up here.
These are 2 high school questions, Dave, and I'm just curious about how you can possibly police the following in terms of vaping in school, in the bathrooms, in classrooms, in front of even teachers, because they don't have that same smell as cigarettes or pot. So what I'm hearing from my 2 high schoolers is that that's happening frequently. That's one question. And then I know you're very passionately talking about jiggering the curriculum, and with the conversation tonight about stress factors and that being the seed and the kernel from where a lot of this comes, I'm wondering if in the new curriculum you see room to have meditation for all, as opposed to just athletes, or mindfulness or visualization and things that kind of bring down that stress load.
Those are 2 great questions, Allyson, so thank you. First and foremost, vaping has come with a lot of challenges. I think it comes back to an educational model, and it really comes back to some of the partnerships that I mentioned before. So I know that during an iASK executive board meeting last year, Judy, in fact, presented to us a lot of the vaping mechanisms. Joules and juuling is the term of choice for teenagers, especially in Westchester. And Ms. Nunziato, who I mentioned, actually did a presentation to our faculty last year, because the way these things look, it often can be happening right under our noses. So I know with that raised the awareness of our faculty and our staff. Through that, some incidents were reported to Mr. Samuelson and myself. And quite frankly, I talk about culture, and I think that there's also a culture for teenagers who are recognizing that some of this is just wrong to be happening, potentially on campus, on a daily basis. And, at times there are some reports, maybe even some pictures that come our way. And we're finding that we've been able to follow up and take care of it. But it is difficult. I think you highlight that. It's something that we've become more aware of. And, again, it goes back to education. It goes back to parental involvement. As I raise that right now, I would imagine there's probably a lot of parents in the room tonight that are not really familiar with the extent of vaping and what it looks like. And, it could be a whole nother evening of conversation for us. And then finally, stress factors are a huge reason why students turn to ways to decompress, and often they're not the healthy choices. So as we've talked about our master schedule at the high school and creating opportunities for decompression, I think you give the perfect segue behind what a lot of our thinking is. So I'm not sure that it's automatically about a meditation for all program, but it's certainly about finding students pathways to the right extracurricular activities that are good for them, and ways to make healthier choices, ways to explore their passions. I think part of the dialogue we've had tonight is How do we get our teenagers excited about things and involved in things that aren't about these risky behaviors that we're focused on tonight? So I couldn't agree with you more, Allyson. I think there's great opportunity ahead with our new master schedule, with community involvement and constant discussions. So thank you.
Just to supplement what Dave said, and I just want to highlight that the effort in and around the vaping just doesn't what's happening in the schools. I can tell that Allyson, Felix, and I have actually gone to businesses, and we've had conversations with them about the dangers of them, who they're selling to, their market. And you look at some of these flavor packets that are, Sour Patch Kids. It's clearly not targeting an adult. And I can tell you that I just whispered to Allyson that I have another business for us to go to, because I stopped in a local business outside of our school district today, but a place that our students frequent, and there's signs as you walk in the door, plastered right across the street from Dobbs High School, that says Juul starter kits available. So there's a piece to it, and I can tell you that there's education, but there's the boots on the ground, and Allyson and me being the example that we literally go in and confront the managers and the owners of these businesses. And I think that all of us, when we talk about responsibility and grabbing hold of these issues, it's not just drugs, it's not just tobacco, it's not just alcohol. Vaping's a real danger. And so when we're looking at that, when you're going into the store and you see that sign in the window, maybe as a responsible community member, we step up and say something as well.
All right, so I would like to thank the panelists for their time and energy this evening. And I would just, Tanya, do you have?
So, obviously, thank you all for coming. I just have two quick notes that, came up at the very last moment. About the prescription drugs, a lot of people ask us, which somebody very rightly pointed out to me, why do you not just flush them? And the reason you don't just flush them is because then those drugs go into our water supply. So then everybody is on Xanax. And, in all seriousness, it doesn't just go away, it becomes part of the water supply. And there's been measurable, levels of drugs, found when water supplies are tested. So it's a really important point about that. And in terms of the vaping, since that wasn't really part of the data, as Judy said, but we know that that's happening among our teenagers. The vaping, Mr. Cohen mentioned this, and it's a really important point, and it actually came up in our CAB meeting. We were talking to students about this at our first CAB meeting this year, and a student, a senior, said, it's not happening as much because now the administrators and the teachers kind of know what it looks like. And so we're more, students are more afraid about getting caught, so they're not doing it as much. So that's, a positive thing that's happened because Jen Nunziato did training. Judy showed adults who didn't know what these things look like. So anyway, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.